This evening's event is in partnership with the Research Office of Mount St. Vincent University, as well as the AMI, the Alexa McDonough Institute, the Nancy's Chair, the MSVU Library, and the Office of People and Culture. Sincere thanks to all of our partners and supporters for making this event possible. And I just wanted to note that as a settler on this land, specifically on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, I am grateful to live and work in Mi'kma'ki. I also want to acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and I offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came to this land before us. In recognition of both the Black and Indigenous Speaker Series as well as African Heritage Month, please, sincere welcome for you to be here with us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to the AMI Chair, Megan Zimmerman.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, okay, that's why I wore my tall shoes. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, who will be Delvina Bernard. So very good to see you, Delvina. And Delvina is an 8th generation African Nova Scotian who traces her family roots to the Black Loyalists of 1783 and the Black refugees of 1812. For more than 30 years, Delvina has dedicated her professional and personal life as an educator, senior administrator, cultural analyst, and musician to developing strategic initiatives aimed at dismantling all forms of systemic discrimination. She is currently an institutional change strategist and social justice advocate, educator, multi-award winning musician, and 8th generation African Nova Scotian who works at the Mount as the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Advisor. She also is a PhD candidate studying economic models for reparatory justice. So Delvina, I'll give you quick second to come on up, and I think you're going to introduce Afua? Yes, okay.
You're all so quiet here. This weather's not helping us, is it? No. So who here, how's your Swahili going these days, everybody? Habari Gandhi, who knows what Habari Gandhi means? That's right. This is why we have her as our keynote. She knows all the important words for African Heritage Month. So Habari Gandhi, like literally, when you say it, it kind of means is, what's the news? That's what it means. Like what? Like someone saying, hey, what's going on? What's happening? What's going on? And the answer to Habari Gandhi is Nzuri, which means everything's cool or everything's all right. So if anytime you hear me here when I get back up, say Habari Gandhi, the answer is Nzuri. You got it. You guys are quick studies. You must all be connected to a university or some place of higher education where you know these kinds of things. So on behalf of everybody, I guess I want to welcome one and all, and I'm pleased to be your moderator this evening, which means I get to say a few things, and most importantly, I get to introduce our very special guest speaker. We're so pleased that everybody's here, and if people traveled from off campus, it's getting a little messy out there, so we particularly thank you for getting here and getting here safe, and I pray that we all get home safe after this. So it has probably already been said that this event is in celebration of African Heritage Month and is brought to you by the Mount St. Vincent University Black and Indigenous Speaker Series and the Alexa McDonough Institute for Women Justice, Women, Gender, and Social Justice. And this is all in partnership with the Nancy's Chair, the MSVU Library, and MSVU Office of People and Culture. And we are all together, very pleased to see you all sitting out there so that we can have this wonderful event featuring our distinguished honored guest, Dr. Afua Cooper. Now, before I perform my task of introducing our campus speaker, I just want to say a word about the pleasure it was working with this committee. I just really want to say it was just wonderful. All the people who participated and pulled their weight and did their share of the work, from the library to the AMI to the folks from research office, and a whole cast of wonderful characters to make this event come. It was truly a group effort, and I think they should all be pleased. And if they just stand up, if you happen to be here, but if not, fantastic. And I want to say, as a member of the newly formed Office of People and Culture and holder of the EDIA portfolio within that office, I'm especially pleased to engage in this kind of work. It's really, all the kind of work that we are doing. And this is a great time to mention that we expect to be back here in this very same spot very soon to officially launch the EDIA action plan. So stay tuned for that. And I see some faces out there who've been on the committee to make this piece of work come to fruition, such as our president. And I see Lori out there, and I can't see that far, guys. I see Susan. I'm not that good. These are my reading glasses, so I have to stay within a range. But we'll be right back here in this very same spot very soon. So before I introduce, there might be some housekeeping. I think everybody here looks so familiar. Everybody's from campus. I don't have to do the typical moderator housekeeping things like saying the bathroom is over there and the run out that door if you hear an alarm. So those things we can skip. But I should say that there are light refreshments that will be available at the end of this lecture. And I don't know, are we still making a little trek over to, or inviting people to make a trek over to the art gallery? Well, it's open until 7. And right now there is an exhibit that features the work of Edith McDonough of Africville. And there's an event around that, I think, last week. I sadly had to miss, but please make your way over after this lecture. And I do think, is it okay that we'll see at the end if our speaker will take a few questions at the end of her lecture, and I do hope she will. She always does. She usually does. So like, as I was saying, everyone's invited to walk over to our art gallery and see that exhibit. Should be great. Should absolutely be great. So now the task that I am really up here for, which is to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Allow me to tell you a little bit about Dr. Afua Cooper. Sit back and relax, because I'm going to read it all. I'm going to give her flowers because she deserves them, right? That's what we don't do often enough. Give people their flowers, when they're in their fullness of strength. We need to do that. So Dr. Afua Cooper is a multidisciplinary scholar, author, an artist. Her 13 books range across the genres of history, poetry, fiction, and children's literature. Dr. Cooper recently joined the University of Toronto Scarborough from Dalhousie University, where she held a Killam Research Chair in Black, Canadian, and African diasporic studies. She has put Black studies on the map in Canada, and I have been to the National Black Studies conferences, and she's very heralded there. And she's put it on the map by ensuring the infrastructural development of Black studies by founding and launching the Black Canadian Studies Association. She founded and coordinated the Black Studies program at Dalhousie University, and Dr. Cooper's engagement with Black studies and anti-racism and equity, diversity, inclusion, and epistemic disruption in the Canadian Academy has made her not only a figure nationally, but also internationally. In 2021, she received over $1 million in funding from the Department of Canadian Heritage to research Black Canadian history across time and space. As the primary investigator for this project, A Black People's History of Canada, Dr. Cooper led a team of researchers and curriculum developers to explore and mobilize knowledge about Black people's history in Canada and the African diaspora. I have a lot of pages, but it hasn't to do with this. It has to do with how big I have to blow up the font. Dr. Cooper is an acknowledged authority on Black Canadian history and a leading expert in Black Canadian studies. Her book on Canadian slavery, The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Slavery in Canada, and The Burning of Old Marielle broke new ground in the study of Canadian and Atlantic slavery and women's history. Dr. Cooper has curated and co-curated 10 exhibits on Black history and culture. The most recent, A History Exposed, The Enslavement of Black People in Canada, is the first national exhibit of slavery in Canada, and it opened at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 right here last year, 2024. It was August, I believe, wasn't it? Yes, I remember that. Dr. Cooper was part of the collaboration team that recently won a Shirk Impact Connections Award in 2024 for outstanding research collaborations, transatlantic pilgrimage, African histories, poetry, and music. That's the title of it. She has been a fellow at the Warren Center for Studies in American History at Harvard University, where she conducted research on slavery and higher education and was part of an international cohort of scholars engaged in similar work. In 2021, she was appointed as the Canadian representative on UNESCO's International Scientific Committee of Slave Roots. A celebrated poet, I can call her Afua now because we're getting into the arts. A celebrated poet, Afua is a founder of the dub poetry movement in Canada. In 2020, she was awarded the Portia White Prize, Nova Scotia's highest recognition for the arts, and was nominated for the Premier of Ontario's Award for Excellence in the Arts. Her latest book, of poetry, The Halifax Explosion, was recently released to very, very wide acclaim. In addition, Dr. Cooper earned the Nova Scotia Human Rights Award for contributions to education, the Bob Marley Prize from the City of Toronto, the Harry Jerome Award, and was acknowledged by Maclean's magazine as one of the 50 most influential Canadians. Now, I didn't say 50 most influential Black Canadians, 50 most influential Canadians. Moreover, Dr. Cooper was conferred with honorary doctorates from Simon Fraser University and the University of Ottawa. She also earned Canada's most prestigious history award, the Royal Society of Canada J.B. Terrell Historical Medal for outstanding contributions to Canadian history. So, just a final comment. I've known Afua for decades, many years, dating back to my days of living in Toronto. When I was touring across Canada those days with the feminist, quasi-feminist, Afrocentric women's a cappella quartet called For the Moment. And we would end up, in those days, Afua and I would end up in many of the same spaces. And famously, Afua, I remember us being a part of the group that led interventions and civil disruptions to have the sort of, what would I say, racially inappropriate exhibit Into the Heart of Africa removed, taken down at the Royal Ontario Museum. And so we danced a lot together in a lot of things in the days of the dub poetry and music all coming together. So Afua, I know it's been difficult to include everything and enumerate everything in your bio, because someone who has done as much as you, it's hard to say it all. But I do not want to leave this podium without noting the fact that you came to us here in Nova Scotia by way of being appointed as the chair, the James Robinson Johnson Chair in Black Canadian Studies. And we got you here. You know how Nova Scotians are. We get you here and we won't let you go. It's like Hotel California. You can never leave. So we are glad that you came. We're glad that you're here. We know you're going to Scarborough, but we will have you back over and over again. And I also want to mention, because many people have heard about the Lord Dalhousie report, which Dr. Cooper authored as well, which looked at the Dalhousie University's connection to the history of slavery. And that was a very seminal, groundbreaking report that we should all know about and look up and have a chance to have a read. So you can see from the illustrious bio of Dr. Cooper and how distinguished and how many things she's been involved in, that she could have picked any one of a dozen or several dozen topics to grace us with tonight. But we are very, very pleased that the topic that she picked for us tonight, because of Mount St. Vincent's own distinguished history as an institution that promotes the education of women and girls, we are glad that the topic she has selected for us tonight is woman-centered, and that is Black women and cultural production, the case of concert stage singer Portia White. It's a wonderful topic. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium our very own Dr. Afua Cooper.
Thank you, Delvina, for such a marvelous introduction. And thanks to all of you for coming out this evening. I think the snow has stopped. But spring is here. Maybe you're thinking, no, that's not the case, but spring is here. Apparently there's a lobster that said we have 6 more weeks of winter, but I wouldn't trust a lobster. The lobster lives in the ocean. I'm gonna go with the groundhog. And I don't think the groundhog has spoken yet, but the message is spring is just around the corner. So it's my great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Tegan for, contacting me, and Jackie also, and Delvina, and for all the team, all members of the team who put this together. And I thought of Portia White because I am researching her as we speak, and I've done a short film, 8 minutes, on Portia White for middle schools, because I'm the principal investigator for a project called the Black People's History of Canada. And one of the themes we are looking at is Black women and cultural production. And in this case, music, singing. It's also great that you have the exhibit up on Edith McDonough, who was a visual artist at a very early, we're talking, around World War I time period that Edith was painting, and she came from Halifax, from Africville. So I like I said, I put together this small film for middle school learners. Sylvia Hamilton has done a big film, a 90-minute film on Portia White, and CBC, I believe, also did a documentary on her. So I'm very happy that there's this, sort of slow interest in Portia White. Canada Post also did a stamp of her. But as I researched her, I thought she was so iconic, and it is so easy for one's work to be forgotten or to be erased. And while doing this work on her and digging up as much as I could, I really fell in love with her, and I thought I'm gonna pursue this path. So it's the end of African Heritage Month, Black History Month. Today's the 27th. We have one more day, but remember that Black History Month is every month of the year. So we continue the work, we continue the pedagogy, we continue the cultural production. And I'm gonna begin with a poem. It's called For Noor, N-O-O-R. And I thought Noor is the name of one of my daughters. And so when she was born, I wrote this poem. And it's a poem that has been used in the exhibit on slavery in Canada, the exhibit that opened at Pier 21 Immigration Museum. And that exhibit has now moved to the Black Cultural Center in Dartmouth. So if you want to see it, it's at the Black Cultural Center. But as I went through the images and the text in putting together this exhibit, I had this profound, thank you, this profound feeling. Of course, you're talking about ancestors. Of course, you're talking about ancestors of a collective, but also ancestors of individual people. So I included this poem in the exhibit. And I also think about Portia White because she has now joined that realm. I pray for the spirit of the ancestors, known and unknown, for those who died when their homes were burnt and destroyed, for those who were captured in slave raids, for those who died on the march to the coast, for those who died in slave castles, for those who died while crossing the sea, perishing at the bottom, for those who died upon arriving from diseases, the lash of whip, malnutrition, and of broken hearts, for those who died fighting for freedom, carrying the flame of revolt in their hands, and those like Nanny, Harriet, Toussaint, and Amina rose up triumphant. The spirit of the old ones, ever watchful, guiding. I pray for the spirit of the ancestors, known and unknown. Portia White is significant because she was the first Black Canadian singer to achieve international fame and acclaim before Oscar Peterson, I have in brackets. Additionally, she brought Canada onto the world stage of concert singing. Born in 1911 in Truro, Nova Scotia, to Reverend William White and Isidora White. She died in 1968 in Toronto. Portia was the third of the Whites' 13 children. In the 40s and 50s, she established herself as a contralto, operatic, and concert singer. Though she was born and raised during the era of the color bar in Canada and Jim Crow in the US, she established herself as a Canadian superstar in a musical domain genre that very few Black people and Black women entered. In the 1940s, she was known as Canada's singing sensation. Her parentage. Reverend White was the son of former enslaved parents from King and Queens County. So Portia was born in 1911. She was literally one and a half generations removed from slavery. Her father was born to enslaved parents. He was born in 1874. So I want you to think about that. Only 9 years after slavery ended in the United States. This point is important, and we will come back to it later. Her mother, Isidora, descended from Black loyalists who went to the Atlantic provinces after the American Revolutionary War. Reverend White embodied the promise of freedom, meaning if one worked hard and got support, you could make something of yourself. It was in fleeing the ensuing Jim Crow culture that was established after the Civil War. In fact, Reverend White was born in 1874, and that was when the Reconstruction ended and white supremacy reasserted itself in a mean and vicious way. So White came to Canada to study at Acadia University. He studied divinity and trained as a pastor, one of the few respectable careers open to talented Black men at the time. Other than portering and popular music, you could serve as a musician. Reverend White did not go back to Virginia after the completion of his studies at Acadia, but married into an old, respectable Black family and took up the pastorship at Zion United Baptist Church in Truro. Later, Reverend White took over the flagship church of the African United Baptist Association, and that is the church here in Halifax, which was called until recently Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, is now called New Horizon Church. Thus, Portia was born and raised in a family that embodied respectability and racial uplift. And what better way to carry out uplift work than through the Black church? As the Black church in North America was one of the main promoters of these discourses, racial uplift, lifting as we climb, etc. She was born at a time of extreme racial anti-Black discrimination, signified by the lack of economic, social, and opportunities for Black people. Out-migration from Nova Scotia in the 1911 census, in the year Portia was born, reflected this fact. Black people were fleeing Nova Scotia and other provinces in Canada. They were going to New England from here, New York, Montreal. But to the United States, the out-migration was really massive. So Portia was born. She grew up singing. In fact, she stated that she was born singing. She sang in the church choir directed by her mother, Isadora. And by the time she was 8, she was in the church choir singing spirituals and light operatic pieces. Her mother also taught her piano. In fact, many Black families at the time had a piano or an organ in the household, attesting to the role of music in their lives. White began music lessons in her early teens, professional training, meaning away from her mother, even though that was, the path that got her to professional training. As her musical talent became known, she began to be supported by middle-class white women who paid for her more advanced lessons. But like most Black families, even middle-class ones, music was probably not thought of as a viable career, especially for women as performers. There were all kinds of sexual anxieties attached to women singing and performing in public. It was not thought of as a suitable career for middle and upper class people, especially women, as I've said. No doubt, respectable Blacks had the same anxieties about their daughters taking up careers as public performers. Thus, at age 18 in 1929, Portia White entered Dalhousie University School of Education to train as a teacher, following in the long line of Black women across the Canadian provinces who trained as teachers, because teaching was one of the handful of professions open to Black women at the time. And of course, it was important to the Black community. Portia entered Teachers College at a time in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and across several other Canadian provinces where education for Black children was segregated. There was also the issue of self-support. The whites had 13 children and they were not rich. The children would have to make their way in the world. So as a teacher, as a professional, she could support herself from teaching. In my work on Black teachers, I discovered that most expressed the view that one of their main desires was to elevate their oppressed brethren and sistren. This does not mean that these teachers did not have an economic motive. Many went into teaching with pragmatic aims. They expected to be paid for their labor, and most depended on their earnings to support themselves and family members. So in 1929, she entered Dalhousie. 3 years later, she graduated and entered the world of work. We know that she taught in such segregated schools as in Africville, in Lucasville, and Beachville. These are small Black communities at the edge of Halifax. So, you know, 1932, what do we have in 1932? We're dealing with this economic downturn called the Great Depression. That White could make it into Dalhousie at a time speaks to her family, social and economic status, and the Halifax network her family was plugged in. But it was good that she had a job upon graduating, because times were hard during the Great Depression for everyone, but for Black people in particular. While she was at Dalhousie, even before she went to Dal, I mentioned that there were some women in Halifax, middle class women, who paid for her advanced training. She had a beautiful voice, and they felt that this voice should be trained and should be heard by everyone. The salary that she earned was a meager salary, so a music lesson even then was expensive. One of the things that Portia White did to make herself be more known was to enter the competitions, the music competitions, and she won every competition that she entered. In 1939, she won a scholarship to study voice at the Music Conservatory with teacher and opera singer Ernesto Vinci. Ernesto Vinci had landed in Halifax from Italy. It was the beginning of the war, and he left Europe, and it was like a godsend that he came. Someone of his skills, someone of his talents landed in Halifax. He was immediately taken up by the conservatory, and he started teaching voice. He himself was also an opera singer. By now, Portia White's talent was recognized by all in the know. I talked about the women who supported her. Her domination of a major prize called the Kennedy Cup had already made her a celebrity in the Maritimes. Portia won every time she entered the Kennedy Cup, she won that cup. And finally, the promoters of the competition retired the cup to her. They said, keep it. You have won all the competitions you have entered. The cup is yours. So Ernesto Vinci convinced her to move from the mezzo-soprano range that she was singing at the time to contralto. He felt as a contralto, she could take advantage of the lower notes. Portia also felt that the move to contralto gave her more range and made her voice more robust. As Portia gave concerts at local venues throughout the Maritimes, she came to the attention of Edith Reed, the principal of one of Toronto's elite girls' schools, Branksome Hall. Reed was on a visit to Halifax and heard Portia White in concert, and she was determined that Portia White had to perform to a larger audience, and this she did in 1941. When Reed arranged for her, and this she did in 1941, when Reed arranged for Portia to perform in Toronto at the Eaton Auditorium. The venue had seating for 1,275 persons, and it was part of the Eaton's empire. You know about Eaton Center. There was a store, a big store called Eaton's. There were Eatons all over the place. So the Eaton Hall was part of that empire. And it was the place in Toronto for musical performances. Portia White's debut at the Eaton Hall was a huge success. The reviewers gushed over her performance. They were captivated by her voice. One reviewer describes her voice as charming and enchanting. Colored and beautifully shaded contralto, a natural voice, a gift from heaven. Soon after this performance, Portia White wired the Halifax School Board that employed her and resigned her position. She was no longer going to be a grade school teacher. She was now going to be a full-time operatic and concert singer. The Eaton Hall concert gave her a boost of confidence. She knew she could make it as a concert singer. She knew she couldn't be doing this part-time anymore, so she jumped with both feet in, as the saying goes. Oxford University Press in Toronto had a management unit that dealt with musical talents, and they quickly signed Portia to their agency. A North American tour quickly followed. Any aspiring artist then and now goes to Toronto, wherever you are in Canada, and after Toronto, New York. And that was what Portia White did. She made her New York debut at the Town Hall in 1944. This was a preeminent performance venue in New York City. White was the first Canadian to open at the Town Hall. And for this performance, she again received rave reviews. And in New York, Columbia Concert Inc. signed her. Tours of North, South, Central America, and the Caribbean followed. Now let's look at the women's network. Musical scholar Jacqueline Warwick notes that White was an example of musical women whose career were made possible because of the work of women operating within the constraints of middle class respectability and sexist, racist institutions of power, unquote. And for Portia White, this was true. Her mother was her first singing and piano teacher. And when her talent was discovered, the Halifax Ladies Musical Club began paying for her to take advanced singing lessons. These women met regularly for concerts, lectures, and conversations, and also donated books, scores, and prizes to support music education in local schools. They loved music. Many of them, like Kate McIntosh, were accomplished musicians, and they felt it was their civic duty to promote music and culture. They were well-to-do and well-connected, and Portia would not have made it without their support. What was the motivation of these women? Certainly they were do-gooders, but they could also be described as feminists or having a feminist consciousness as they supported women artists. They also must have felt a sense of gratification in spotting a talent and developing it. And I think we need research on these women. The Halifax Ladies Musical Club mentioned Jacqueline Warwick has done some research on women in music, but maybe this is something that the Institute here could delve into. Under their guidance, as I said, Portia won and entered every music contest in the province and beyond. They retired the Kennedy Cup to her. The Ladies Club also was the institution. These women were the ones who gave her the scholarship to study at the Music Conservatory under Ernesto Vinci. And it was another woman, Edith Reed, the principal of Branksome Hall, that arranged for White to make her Toronto debut. And later on, in Toronto, Portia White lived with Edith Reed in her home in Rosedale. Thus, in terms of material and social realities, there was a band of white women that intervened in a powerful way in Portia White's life. She must have felt indebted to them. But the point I want to make here is the power of this network that Professor Warwick speaks of. These women had means, connections, and influence in the world of music, and in society, and in education. And the Halifax Ladies Club struck again, in a good way, when they established the Nova Scotia Talent Trust so White could concentrate on her professional career. I think that's fantastic. Any artist will tell you in whatever discipline, in whatever genre, that having the support, having the material support to just go and do your art and study, you know, your artistic discipline is what's required to advance as an artist. And so these women established a Nova Scotia Talent Trust, which is still around today, so that she could do that, concentrate on her professional career. And I'm sure some of you know about this Talent Trust because to this day, it's still helping artists from Nova Scotia to pursue their dreams. I'm going to speak about the tour. What does the tour mean? I said Portia White went on a tour to South America, different parts of North America, the Caribbean. What did it mean for her? Today, entertainers like Beyonce and Taylor Swift have a huge touring entourage. They have people to cook for them, consult on their wardrobe, makeup, jewelry, etc. For Portia, this was not the case. She had to find and select her own wardrobe and jewelry, arrange her booking dates, and arrange for other quotidian aspects of the tour. She had no entourage, as is common for today's stars. Some of these things ought to have been done by Columbia, the agency that signed her, but they weren't. We know from Portia White's letters that she was unhappy with the treatment at Columbia concerts. She never used the word racism, but you have to read between the lines. She felt that Columbia concert did not treat her as an artist the way that they should have treated her and the way they treated white artists. The tour itself was hard on her body and her voice. Pouring on the Jim Crow social realities of music making for Black artists. In the US, White toured under the circumstances of Jim Crow. Society was segregated in every aspect of life, and this touched Portia. There are instances of her not being able to sit in restaurants, but had to order the food and take out the food and maybe sit in a park or a train station and eat the food, or not being allowed to stay at hotel, or being allowed to stay at hotels sometimes, but she couldn't use the restaurants or the swimming pool. She and one of her accompanist, a man by the name of Kushner, came from South America, and Miami is sort of the receiving point on the North American continent if you're coming from further south. So they arrived in Miami on their way, as I said, from South America tour. They were going to New York. And when they got to the hotel told them that Kushner could stay at the hotel, but she couldn't. So both of them went back to the airport and they slept at the airport and waited the next day for their flight to New York. So she had to deal with those realities while, in the evening coming on stage and singing beautifully. Think of that for a moment. On stage, she was a star, performing to a mainly white audience. Off stage, she was just another Black woman, vulnerable to the racist and sexist discrimination that Black women endured on tour. We know about Billie Holiday and the bladder infection because she couldn't use the washroom in the venues in which she was performing. In 1954, White retired due to struggles with her voice and her unhappiness with her management agency. And she went back to her first career, that of teaching. But she wasn't teaching, she didn't go back to teaching the 3 R's. She took up a position at Branksome Hall as a voice and music teacher and became a voice tutor to a new generation of Canadian singers and actors like Lorne Greene, Dinah Christie, and Robert Goulet. She lived in Toronto as a single and independent woman, and she came out of retirement twice. First, in 1964, to perform for Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip at the Confederation Arts Center in Charlottetown, and in 1967 at the National Arts Center in Ottawa. She died from cancer in February of 1968. I'm asking, why opera? Opera was a very, and still is, elitist musical form. It was very expensive to train as an opera and classical singer. The production of it was very costly. Within North America especially, it was very upper class and very white. Interestingly, in Italy, it was not like that. As a type of musical genre, it had strict vocal requirements. Opera was high art, a genre that was not the most accessible for Black women, given what it costs to train the voice. It was steeped in European musical tradition. Within North America, it was not popular music. And so when you contrast that to Italy, where it was popular music. Portia White also sang spirituals, hymns, and I must say that many of her opera pieces, of course, were in German, French, Spanish, and Italian. A contemporary of White, to whom she was most often compared, was Marian Anderson, the African-American classical singer. This was before the heyday of such singers, opera singers like Leontine Price, Jessie Norman, and Kathleen Battle. These women were coming later, and today we have people like singers like Pretty Yendi. It's more accepted now for Black women to be in opera, to be singing opera. In Portia's time, not so much. So she was certainly a trailblazer. I could have ended my talk there, but I want to round out Portia as much as possible, humanize her as much as possible. Portia White, child prodigy, grew up and had a brilliant career. That could be the end of my talk. And this is a picture most of her biographers paint. And that picture is more or less a true one. Well, what about her personal life? How can we round her out to be as human as possible? We know she came from a large family, but what about her own personal emotional life? We know she never married, but she certainly had lovers or a lover. At the age of 24 in 1935, and working as a school teacher, Portia White gave birth to a child. Remember now that she was a rising star at the time. The women of Halifax were paying for her singing lessons, and she was known all over the Atlantic provinces. Relatives that I've spoken to states that she did not want the child. She wanted to sing and saw the child as an impediment to her success. She gave the child up to a maternal relative. The child, who became known as Jimmy Gray, was never legally adopted by the relative, but grew up not knowing that Portia White was his mother. Think of Portia, child of Reverend White. Portia came from Halifax at the time, most prominent Black family, one steeped in religion and respectability. Having a child out of wedlock, that's like an absolute no-no. What a shame she must have felt as her pregnancy became obvious. Feelings of letting herself and her family down, and the real shame of being a single woman with a child must have coursed through her. One can imagine how disappointed her parents were with her. I don't think that the Halifax Ladies Musical Club knew that Portia White was pregnant. Or maybe they did. I don't know. I'm just thinking about the time, 1935. Discussion has occurred. I've spoken to a few of her relatives, and their feeling is that she was sent away to the country. Her mother was from Yarmouth side. There's speculation she was sent away to the country as her belly grew large. She had the child, then was returned to Halifax. I don't know. Maybe she came to term in Halifax and had the baby. But it didn't seem that the ladies' club knew that she was pregnant. Anyway, the child she gave away the child, and the child was adopted. She wanted to pursue music. That was clear. And this pressure of her wanting to pursue music, wanting to be a star, led her to give up the child. But a year later, in 1936, when her father died, she won the Kennedy Cup for a third time. So she won the Kennedy Cup again, a year after she had the child. Who was the father of the child? He's identified as one, Dr. Hartley Carlton Rollock. He entered Dalhousie University in 1929, the same year she did, to study medicine. He did 4 years of postgraduate training and graduated as an MD from Dalhousie University. According to the university's yearbook, Rollock was a Barbadian who gave his address as Church Street, Speightstown, Barbados, British West Indies. As I said, both of them entered Dal the same year, 1939. Rollock was 11 years older than Portia. He would have been 29 years old when they met. There would not have been many Black students on campus, so it seemed natural that she and Rollock would have gravitated toward each other and started a romantic relationship. In the School of Medicine yearbook for 1933-34, we find Rollock's his identification and information about him. In 1934, she was pregnant. And we know Rollock graduated, left, went to New England, and from New England, left and took a position in Northern Ireland, where he practiced as a doctor until he died in 1993. I don't know if he knew that Portia White was pregnant. The child that Portia had, Jimmy Gray, married, had a family, but as I've said earlier, for decades he did not know he was the child of Portia White. I want you to remember that Portia White was only one generation removed from slavery. For a Black Canadian woman to take up one of the most difficult musical forms and make a success of it meant that she was audacious. The remarkable thing that she chose opera in a time of extreme racial hostility against Black people, not only in society at large, but in music, and more specifically in this world of opera, speaks to her courage. Had she chosen jazz or gospel, she would have traveled with a Black band and would have less difficulty on the road, even though I'm not sure about that. No, I mean, but she was a Black woman negotiating Jim Crow as she sang opera. One could argue that Portia had to wear the white mask to survive. You know, this Frantz Fanon's term, white skin, black mask, exhibiting the double consciousness that Du Bois spoke about. She lived life on her own terms. And I will end with this video of Rihanna singing on Sunday night, the 12th of March, 2023. It's 2 years, just under 2 years now, at the Oscars. Rihanna was performing her hit song, Lift Me Up, the theme song for the movie Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Rihanna took the stage, showing her pregnant belly, belting out the song, backed by an all-Black band with a string section composed only of Black women. Meanwhile, her partner and child's father, A$AP Rocky, who was just in the news, toasted her with a glass of what I presumed was champagne. What a huge contrast to Portia White, a budding artist hiding her pregnancy and giving away the baby. In this performance of Rihanna embodied and embraced the full extent of her Black womanhood as she expressed it. Portia White, I would argue, opened the way for this. Thank you very much. On YouTube, there are snippets of Portia White singing. I have a snippet here on this presentation. So you can, there are little 2-3 minutes videos of her singing in English, in German, in Italian, and in French. You can also watch Rihanna sing that on YouTube. But I thought it was just phenomenal. Her entire string section was composed of Black women. That was a deliberate choice. There they are. It was just gorgeous. I thought it was a gorgeous performance. And so, like I said in my closing statement, Portia White opened the way for all of that. Thank you for your kind attention.
Wow, that's something. As a musician, and that being the topic, is just saying to my heart, to hear such a politicized, feminist interpretation, spiritual interpretation of the life and times of Portia White, just absolutely is something in the research you have done is so critical. And as we are here narrowing out the end of African Heritage Month, this work needs to be put in a framework that our young folks can hear, and be also for folks at the post-secondary level, because there's so many lessons to be learned from the life of Portia White. And I just think about my connection as a child. That's when I remember first hearing about her. My father used to say, Portia White was my school teacher at the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, where my father and his 4 sisters grew up. And I didn't know much about who she was. It's not like you could go Google her. But as we grew older and saw and learned many things, and as I got older and I got to meet her brother Lauren White and her sister Yvonne White, and I got to sing with her at an event for CBC, and interviewed Lauren and Yvonne for something that I was doing to do a write-up on them. But even as family members, the level of depth of what you have put, the lens you have put on her, is beyond what I learned from them in so many ways. What you have done here is just tremendous. It's monumental. It was so funny, all the connections going through my head there, because when you mentioned the Nova Scotia Talent Trust, and a good friend of mine who was a Dalhousie theater student, she always talked about the fact that she was supported by the Nova Scotia Talent Trust while she was in theater school at Dalhousie, how much that helped her financially, impacted her. She moved to Toronto. Her name is Anne-Marie Woods. She was in the group for the moment. And she's actually in Halifax visiting right now, because she came here because she started a scholarship which is managed by the Nova Scotia Talent Trust for Black students in theater. And she came here to meet her first 2 scholarship recipients this week. So what happened for Portia White, and then you see how it trickles down that other people have done things too, and so on and so on. And you bringing her to life this way. The only other research of depth is the film that Sylvia Hammond did. So between the two of you, you know, you've really given us something so significant to think about, in humanizing her, about her life and what she experienced, her relationship, the politics of that relationship of class and opera, and the support of the white women from a specific class genre that were able to elevate her, and the choices that she made are just really amazing. So I just want to thank you for enlightening all of us here. I'm going to go home a changed person, 100%, about Portia White. I mean, I've always, because when I think about my own journey in music, and I think, like, when you try to look at who are the role models, there was only her. And it's understandable why a lot of other people didn't jump off to try to do that also, because even today, you know, and you've made it very clear how challenging it is to be a woman in the cultural sector, and the whole sexualization of women performing, that a lot of people don't ever want their daughters to go off and do that. And I think the only reason I got to go around the country doing that, we were in a group of 4. But to try and do that by yourself would have been just absolutely challenging. But Afua, you have really graced us. You have blessed us with knowledge that we didn't have. And we are all better for it today for what you have done. And I want to again thank the vision of the committee members to invite you and your brilliant vision to choose this topic to enlighten us about someone we thought we knew, but now we know better. So again, please give your thanks and applause to Dr. Afua Cooper, and then I think she'll take some questions.
Thank you, Delvina. On the point you mentioned her legacy. And when I did the 8-minute video for the middle school learners, there's a little snippet in it of Renee Smith performing sort of as a young Portia. But of course, Renee Smith also is a spiritual descendant of Portia White. Renee Smith is now, Saturday night we saw her perform at the gala, the African Heritage Month Gala downtown. And also your group, I think of your group, Delvina, For the Moment, for women singers going across Canada, singing, giving voice to the struggles, and the legacies of Black Nova Scotia and Black Canada is, part of Portia's legacy. So if anyone has any comments or questions. I should also say that I'm also looking at Phyllis Marshall. Phyllis Marshall was a jazz singer from Ontario. Salome Bay, who recently passed away. Salome Bay did jazz and blues and really contributed to Canadian music and to Canadian women's music. And Eleanor Collins, Eleanor Collins from British Columbia. She was also the subject of a Canada Post stamp, but Eleanor Collins had her own TV show in the 1950s, CBC. Just incredible. 1950s, she had her own show, music show. She sang jazz. There were skits. So I think little by little, we're bringing up this history of Canadian women in music, especially Black women.
Any comments, questions? Okay.
Wow, thanks so much for that. That was amazing, Afua. My question is how to do justice in archiving the recording. So, for example, we have sort of the written story, and then we would all, I think, benefit from having as well some collection. So for the particular project that you're working on now, is there a way to also look at finding where their recordings are housed, if they're not housed, to find a way to amplify access to those recordings through archival collections? Just curious.
Yes, thank you for the question. We know that the thing, Portia, to my knowledge, never made an album, what we call a full album, but there are recordings. CBC has some of her recordings. You can listen to them on the CBC site or on YouTube. And her niece, Sheila White, who lives in the GTA area of Ontario, also has some recordings that I think she's gonna put out on a CD or already has put out on a CD. I can't remember, but you're right about how do we archive this information? How do we make it more accessible to the public? Efforts are being done in that regard. So I keep saying CBC has done this, and the work that I've done, it's up online, Black People's History of Canada website. You can go there, you can see the film, the short doc. There is also a lesson plan that was developed on Portia White's life. It was done by a teacher who worked as part of the project, Black People's History of Canada, Robin Brown, who is a teacher at Dartmouth High. So look at the website, there's a full sum enough learning on Portia White, and it's accessible for everyone, anywhere, at any time.
Jackie, to what you were saying, what I understand, Afua, there was one recording,
Okay,
an album form. I remember Dr. George Elliott Clark, who's my good buddy, had borrowed his mother's copy and brought it to my house. I made a cassette of it way back in the
okay,
80s. His
okay.
mother almost had a fit because he took it out of the house. And many years later, I had the good fortune, because I used to hang around a lot of pawn shops and antique shops, got to be known. And a young fella there who worked there, I walked in one day and he handed a Portia White album in my hands. I said, "Where did you get that?" He said, "Well, when we go to do estate sales," he said, "there's sometimes we just go buy the whole house." He said, "And I saw this." And I said, "I know who I can give this to."
So they found it in the States?
I have it. Yeah, I have an
Oh.
album, a Portia White album, and George W. Clark is the only other person I know that has one. But they did do a CD, a compilation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I don't
Sheila
know if
White
it's on a
told me
streaming,
that.
and I don't know if it's on a streaming platform or not. I should
Yeah.
go Google that to see. But there is access to audio of Portia White. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, her niece Sheila White did tell me that. I think that's the source that produced it, Sheila.
Thank you for your talk, and this just sort of continues the archival or research process. But how did you conduct your research? Did you just speak with people who knew Portia, or did you use the city archives, or what type of sources did you use to put together this
Okay,
this history?
sure, thank you. So yes, in terms of speaking to people, I spoke when I was doing the work for the short doc to Portia's niece, Sheila White. George Elliott Clark, George Elliott Clark's grandmother is sister to Portia White. And so that's in terms of a family and the oral history. I didn't know your dad was taught by her at the colored home. See, so that's amazing. So I'm gonna have to talk to you. I know your dad has passed on. The work on her baby father, Mr. Rollock, and you see that was also very crucial, because we're told that during that time period, Dalhousie graduated, or there were only 2 Black doctors in Halifax. We know of Dr. Legore, Dr. Courtney Legore, who trained at Queen's University in Ontario, and then he came and practiced medicine in Halifax. And then Dr. Alfred Waddell, who I think graduated in 1935 from Dalhousie Medical School. And they said, oh, and there was not another Black person trained until something like 1978. But in looking through the Dalhousie Medical Archives, there's Dr. Rollock, 1933, 34. So he's kind of lost to history. But he trained here, got his license here, and there were 1 or 2 other doctors that Black men that I discovered. So using the medical archives was another way. Perusing extensively the CBC archives, what CBC has, and as I mentioned, CBC did about a 40-minute doc. And of course, when I taught, I still teach, but I'm not teaching it this year. When I taught my course on Black Canadian women's history, I have a section on women artists. I always teach Portia White. And the Sylvia Hamilton did a 90-minute film on Portia, where she goes about the United States mainly and in Canada, examining Portia's trajectory. So archival work, the medical archives, looking at the broader context of women in cultural production. I read a lot about opera, watched a lot of opera videos. I'm of course an opera fan. I love Kathleen Battle. And reading the secondary literature. One of our own colleagues, some of you may know her, Jacqueline Warwick, has written a lot on women and cultural production. And I looked at Jackie's work and the work also of other scholars. What I'm looking at now is, because the work continues, is, you know, I'm just going to call them the school board. It's another name. The records for teachers. The teachers' records, because Portia was at Africville, she was at Hammond's Plain, and she was at Lucasville. There are people around, I'm sure they're getting on up there in age, whom she taught. Well, we know she also taught Delvina's, but she also taught at the colored home, you see? So there's that's outside of, you know, she taught at the segregated school in Lucasville. Here she was also teaching at the colored home. So the teacher's record, or records, are another source for finding about Portia White. George Eliot Clark and I, we had like extensive discussions about the baby and the pregnancy. It's interesting. It really is interesting. And, you know, we think of the choice that she made in giving up the child in 1934, right? It's almost 100 years ago.
Thank you so much, Afua, for your talk. One thing that just occurred to me while you were describing the child is that it seems like you are taking a women's history approach to Portia White, which I find really refreshing. Because usually we think of history as, you know, the great deeds and adventures of men, particularly white men, but you're also showing us this very public figure, Portia White. You know, she's on a stamp, but you're telling us something different about her, something that we don't know, which is the personal, the familial. And to me, that sort of reads as women's history, like a feminist approach to history. So I don't know if that was sort of your intention with diving into Portia White's life, but maybe you could say a little bit more about women's history.
Sure. I was, you know, Portia White was a star. So the approach to the biography of stars is that kind of like hero worship, right? They're great. They have a #1 hit, so on and so forth. So of course there was some of that there, but I was thrilled when I discovered that Portia White performed in Kingston, Jamaica, where I'm from, right? And the newspaper, it said she was received by the leading ladies of Kingston. I'm like, who are these leading ladies, right? We're gonna find that out. Well, I'm like, whoa, she performed in Kingston, amazing. And she performed with Kushner. Kushner was her accompanist. So there was that, you know, here's this woman, she tours the Caribbean, she tours South America, of course she tours North America. And so I felt like that personal connection to her as she performed in my home city. But yes, I'm trained as a feminist historian. So you're always saying, okay, what's the critical read here, right? You look at it through a critical race theory also. This woman, she's a star on stage. She can't use the washroom, or she can't eat in the restaurant, or she can't swim in the pool. Good God, that's just horrible. right? Yet she has to come out in her beautiful gown and jewelry and be the star for that evening. Like, what toll did it take on her if it did? I'm not the kind of historian who's talking about the strong Black women and they're resilient and they go through life. Of course, they did that, right? Billie Holiday used to sing Strange Fruit, look at her driver and rush from the stage into the bus, and the driver push the gas and they drive off, right? Strange Fruit, the white audience hated that song. So they were resilient, they were tough, they were courageous, but they were human beings, right? And so that's the angle I approached it from. Who was this woman? What did it mean? Is she wearing the mask all the time? She lived at Edith Reed's house in Rosedale. She had to be nice around white people. Did she tell them off sometimes? I don't know. But she couldn't be smiling the whole time, you know. She certainly had the Canadian niceness, but she came from Nova Scotia. This was like Jim Crow town when she was born and growing up, right? So it is, and how do women participate in these cultural contexts, in these cultural spaces? If she were a man, a Black man even, we probably would have had more recordings of her, more albums. You know, she didn't have that. Earlier, Teague and I were talking about Edith McDonough and how Edith McDonough stopped painting. Edith was super talented, as you can see from her art, but she stopped painting when she got married and had children. So there are all these sacrifices that women make when they enter these spaces of art and culture. And it's layered. We talk about intersectionality. Now here she going up on stage and her Blackness and her femaleness intersecting, and she has to negotiate that world. And she has to negotiate that world, even in a woman-dominated space, like with the Halifax Ladies Club, musical club, right? She had to be a nice girl. She couldn't be, I don't think she could speak her mind. I don't know. I don't think those women knew she was pregnant. She wanted them to see her talent and to support that talent. But that also had conditions, right? To be pregnant, not married, having the baby out of wedlock. That was a no, 100 years, when 1934. So we have to give this whole narrative a feminist reading.
Fantastic. Not to mention she was a PK too, right? She's a pastor's kid.
She was a pastor's kid.
That was another layer, right? But it may
Yes.
also have been the layer that helped her to be polite. If you're the pastor's kid and you go into church and sing it every Sunday, you have to be polite. So that's probably how she survived staying in Rosedale, most likely. But I'm looking around to see if there are other questions. And Afua, I always think about how small the African Nova Scotian community is, because when you mention, Jimmy Gray, and then his son, Darcy Gray.
Mm-hmm. Who is on my slide? But
yeah, he's on the slide. Yeah, he
Yeah.
went to engineering school with my spouse at, well, it was Technical University then. Now it's Dalhousie, but he became an industrial, and they were both in industrial engineering school together. And well, he certainly knew. He told my spouse, he said Portia White was my grandmother. Yeah, so it did sort of come up years later that was the case. And the old people say, oh yes, oh yeah, he became an engineer, because that was not something you saw. Still, we don't have very many Black engineers. Oh, because that was Portia's grandson. That's why he was so smart. That's what people would say. Everybody has their own little interpersonal mush story. Are there any more questions for Dr. Afua Cooper? And are you going to lead people over to the gallery if they want to come, or if people want to mingle for a bit here first and then make their own way?
I just want to say, don't you find again too the received knowledge about Black engineers? It's like that person 20 years ago was the first Black engineer.
Yeah.
And then as you start doing like Mr. Gray, you find, oh, there was a Black engineer from way back.
That's
and
right.
there would be several Black engineers.
That's right.
So I think that's why it's so important that this work is ongoing, because so much of it is erased and just kind of, bulldozed like Africville. And then people say, oh, no, the first one was in 1980 when there was one in 1940.
Truth. Speaking truth. Yeah. Scanning the audience. Oh,
People
Any
are
other
just
comments?
taking it in.
well, it's a lot to process,
Yeah.
and you've given us a lot to take home. This is just, a perfect way to bring the African Heritage Month to a close. I was away for a bit of time this month, and I missed out on all the fun things like the gala you talked about, and
Mhm.
many other things, and even the wonderful things that were happening here on campus. So I'm glad I was part of this. This is a highlight for me. So if we don't have any other further comments or questions, then on behalf of everybody who's been involved, I want to once again thank you all for your attentiveness and for listening and learning. And I just think that this Indigenous and Black Scholar series that is part of this university is a phenomenal teaching tool, asset, way to connect us to knowledge that is often buried. And so let's keep that going. So hats off to the research office for doing that work, and we'll keep it going. Dr. Afua, thank you again, Miss Afua. Okay.